Hey guys, so still no ban list, so I figured I'd do this tier list by the data video for rogue decks only, since more often than not, your rogue deck won't be affected by whatever will get hit on the next list. As usual, a big thanks to my sponsors as always, and speaking of Dragon Shield, if you're gonna be at YCS Niagara this weekend, make sure to comment on my tweet that I'll link below so that you can be considered for a free giveaway of some sleeves. I'll pick 2 winners by Friday morning and we can meet at the venue at the YCS so I can personally deliver them to you. So the formula to calculate the rogue tier score will be the same as always by using data from YGS Scope, and we'll once again use the top cut representation from YCS Rio for the calculation. Now in the overall meta tier list video that I posted last week, this was how the decks were categorized. So for this video, we won't be covering decks that were noted as tiers 1 or 2, although I'm also not going to include Branded Despia for this video either because I feel like it's still a little too strong to be considered rogue. As usual, there are some decks that YGS Scope cannot properly identify, such as Exosisters, Marincess, Libromancers, or Predaplants. Now Runic is also something the site can't identify yet, but Runic Mine probably would be considered tier 2 anyways. As usual, Burning Abyss can't be identified as most of the Burning Abyss numbers are actually representing Phantom Knight decks, and Dinomorphia unfortunately gets categorized as Dinos, so I can't identify this deck either. So let's start with the tier list, and coming at number 1 is Ignister, which I think you can easily argue that this should be in tier 2. Definitely seeing good competitive success with the small math mech engine, so it's a good time to be playing cyber stuff right now. It was also the second most played rogue deck on Dueling Book in the last 7 days with a 52% match win percentage online. Now the most played rogue deck on DB right now is actually Heroes, which unfortunately has not had much IRL competitive success lately, and also its win percentage wasn't great at 46%, but because of how often it's played, it does make it high on this DB rogue tier list. Darklaw to banish everything is very strong against both tiers and Sprite, and Heroes always seem to get some form of support every now and then, so it's a solid rogue choice, although generally is not the cheapest deck out there. Next we have Salamangreat, which in fact is a very good budget option minus the access code Talker, which has been tier 2 for a few months until lately it's fallen back down. Nothing's really changed for the deck since its tier 2 status days, but there were just better new strategies that entered the mix. I'm sure you'll at least see this deck top regional level events still, and being a cyberspace deck, there's bound to be some indirect support at least here and there over time, such as Heat Soul. Last on the A tier is Drytron, which at least is still being played a decent amount on Dueling Book and is still a formidable strategy when you let it combo off. Pretty big brain to pilot though, so if you're a relatively new player, probably would not recommend starting with this one. This deck also does bring ritual summoning mechanic to its best and is still the better ritual option compared to something like Necroz or Shinobirds that I've been seeing on DB. Starting off B tier is Altergeist. Now this deck actually made top 8 at Euros, which had close to 3,000 players, which is insane, although no tops at YCS Rio, which this formula was based on. Has always been reliable and consistently made my top rogue deck videos, and with the power of Mystic Mine, I guess you can't sleep on this strategy. Name a better duo than Imperm and Multifaker. Next is a strange new addition, and that is Magical Musketeers. Now this is most likely because of Runic Magical Muskets, since muskets were the original strategy where you could play the archetype cards from the hand if you control a musket monster. This strategy is more trap heavy, whereas the runic stuff is more so spell heavy, so being able to activate both from the hand as long as the conditions are met seemed to be a pretty good synergy. Sadly, its 44% match win percentage in the last 7 days is pretty bad, so maybe that synergy needs some more work and testing. Then we have Dinos, and multiple people in the comments have pointed out that Dinomorphia numbers are also contributing to the Dino numbers, so that's sort of inflating the counts here. 51% match win percentage honestly isn't so bad for a rogue deck, and considering that no one is playing Lancia right now, you are free to go off with your misplays. Next we have Virtual World, which noticeably went missing on my overall meta tier list as it seemed to have fallen off for the month. 54% match win percentage is respectable, and it ends on some cool boards, although Shen is not as powerful as Darklaw when it comes to the tier limit matchup. Then we have True Draco, and I just have no idea how this is not only constantly making my rogue tier list videos, but it's actually climbing up in the ranks. As mentioned many times, this was my first competitive deck, and honestly it's just not that good right now, although surprisingly won almost half of their matches in the last 7 days. Someone tell me if True Draco is being mixed with another strategy right now and that's what's making them slightly popular, because otherwise it's not a deck I would recommend playing unless you really want to play a super budget deck. Next up on YGS Scope we had Red Eyes, which basically is probably referring to some kind of Dragoon focused deck. Likely not Subterror, since that deck can be identified specifically on YGS Scope, so maybe it's something like Gravekeeper's Dragoon, which might actually not be that bad with Necro Valley in the current meta. Gone are the days of Anaconda Dragoon Turbo, but there are still different ways of accessing Red Eyes Fusion, so that paired with some heavy duty floodgates, and this strategy could do some actual damage. Starting off tier C, we have Madolche, and I know several people commented on my last rogue tier list video asking where this deck went. Kinda seems to go in and out, but it's a pretty solid rogue strategy that can OTK out of nowhere, and that 57% win percentage is pretty nice. Then we have Phantom Knights, which is still a favorite for many players and is still pretty underrated, as I always felt that this deck has a nice balance of disruptions through monsters and back row. Haven't seen many IRL tops from this deck since the ban of Anaconda though. Next we have Dogmatica Invoke, which sadly continues to deteriorate as a competitive strategy. Really funny how not that long ago people really wanted the Invocation package to get hit in some fashion, and after getting ignored by Konami for so long, I guess the game has evolved and it's just not posing that much of a threat anymore, at least for now. So now we have Lightsworn, and I was so confused that this somehow made it this high onto the rogue tier scene, and apparently Lightsworn Telements is a thing and that's why it's brought it up this high. The win percentage wasn't so great, but honestly to have the chance to be able to play Lightsworn again in the current timeline, I think that's pretty sweet. And then we have DDD, which realistically I think is a better option than any of the decks listed so far in this C tier. It's another big brain deck, but looks like the ones that are playing DDD are those that actually understand how the deck works, and that 50% match win percentage ain't so bad. Next we have my beloved Cyber Dragons, which as usual do not have a good win percentage at 43%, and certainly has not topped a YCS level event anytime recently. The last one I think was actually by me last summer. The Clockwork Knight spell that will turn every monster on the field to machines may be coming out sometime this year in the TCG, so feel free to check out my testing video if you're interested in this deck. Then we have Adamancipators, yet again another combo deck among our list of rogue options. If Hulk does get banned on the list, not sure what happens to this deck or if it still even relies heavily on Hulk. I'm like super outdated in my Adamancipator knowledge nowadays. Has probably one of the coolest gimmicks out there in terms of excavating for rocks, and maybe this will become a tier 1 strategy again someday. Next we have ABC, which I believe should be at least in the B tier of rogue. Really can't understand what happened with this deck. It was essentially tier 1 for a brief moment when ABC Brave Therian was a thing on release, still packing a strong win percentage at 57%, but sadly not many players are running ABC online and thus leading to a low rogue tier score. For our final tier, we have Machina Infinitrack, which I also think deserves to be much higher in the rankings. It had a crazy 64% match win percentage, although of course it's based on a smaller sample size than the rest, hence the lower tier score. Admittedly, the deck does get joked around a lot for taking like 10 minutes for their combo and draw, only to end on a mediocre board, but realistically it's a good rogue strategy, and anything that can play with skill drain is going to have a chance in the current meta. Lastly, we yet again have Blue Eyes somehow make it onto the rogue tier list, and that 25% match win percentage has got to be the lowest that I've ever seen, and as brutal as it sounds, it's probably pretty accurate of the power level of this deck. Obviously a fan favorite, but if you want to have a chance of at least topping locals with the rogue strategy, I would definitely recommend looking at something else. Alright guys, so that was it for this month's rogue tier list. Hope you found that helpful in choosing the next rogue deck that you want to play. As always, a big thanks to my Patreons, Eileen Dice Queen, Bolt Spider, Cybernetic, Brandon Jaren, Bearlord, Spooky Boogie, and Stephen Phillips as always for supporting the channel. You guys are truly amazing. If you're interested in joining my Patreon, links down below. Take care guys.